Welcome to this explainer. Now, before we begin our rigorous linguistic investigation into the Creole paradigm, I want to start out with a definition and a rather massive misconception that I had, and maybe many of you had as well. I used to think that Creole was just a French base with local influence. I viewed it as a somewhat degraded form of Standard French. But instead, as linguists have proven, it is a stable, full-fledged natural language that develops from the mixing of colonial languages and indigenous languages. Oh, and it's also often spelled with a K in other countries. Now, if I am wrong, please correct me, but I've found the absolute best way to demonstrate this is by using a universal phrase, like "let's go home," and seeing how it actually functions across different contact languages. We will be doing exactly that today as we deconstruct the scientific mechanics of these fascinating linguistic systems. Okay, let's dive into our syllabus for today. First, we will address that great Creole misconception in more detail. Next, we'll define creolization scientifically, followed by the linguistic anatomy of superstrates and substrates. Then we'll apply this by translating the phrase, "let's go home," look at the global footprint of these languages, and finally examine the shift from societal stigmatization to standardization. Section 1. The Great Creole Misconception. So, going back to that initial question, is Creole simply a French-based dialect with local influences? As I mentioned, I absolutely held this misconception for quite some time. It is a very common belief to assume that a Creole is merely a localized, slightly altered variant of a single colonial tongue, usually French, with a few indigenous vocabulary words sprinkled in for local color. But the scientific consensus corrects this assumption completely. First, notice the term itself is truly global, and it's often spelled with a K, such as KRIL or KREIO, depending on the specific country. Most importantly, a Creole is not a dialect. It is a stable, full-fledged natural language. It is born from the intensive mixing of different colonial and indigenous languages, resulting in a completely new grammatical reality that is entirely independent of any specific French base. Section 2. Defining creolization scientifically. To truly appreciate how this happens, we have to look at the mechanics of language birth. Linguists, heavily influenced by the work of Robert Hall, describe the genesis of these languages through a very specific life cycle. In Generation 1, we have contact. Groups of people without a common language are forced to interact, historically due to trade, colonization, or the transatlantic slave trade. By Generation 2, a pidgin forms. This is a highly simplified, rudimentary tool for basic communication. It lacks complex grammar, and crucially, it is nobody's native tongue. But the linguistic pivot happens in Generation 3 during nativization. Children are born into a community where this pidgin is the primary daily vernacular. Their developing, brilliant brains take this simplified tool and naturally expand it, systematizing the rules and filling in the linguistic gaps. By Generation 4 and beyond, what began as a mere survival tool has fully transformed into a Creole, which is a complex, complete native language. So the crucial point we must understand is that a Creole is never broken English or bad French. Creoles possess highly consistent grammar systems, incredibly stable vocabularies, and they are acquired natively by children. They exhibit all the structural complexities and the cognitive depth of any other natural language on Earth. Section 3. Superstrates and substrates. Now that we understand how they are born, we need to analyze their internal anatomy. Linguists break down the DNA of a contact language into two primary components, the superstrate and the substrate. The superstrate is typically the language of the socially or politically dominant group, historically the European colonial power. This language supplies the vast majority of the vocabulary, what we call the lexicon. Conversely, the substrate refers to the languages of the socially subordinate groups, often the local indigenous populations or enslaved Africans. While their specific words might not dominate the dictionary, their native languages profoundly influence the underlying grammatical structure, the phonetics, and the syntax of the new language. It's a remarkable fusion where the vocabulary of one group is spoken through the grammatical architecture of another. Section 4. Translating "let's go home." To make this abstract linguistic theory concrete, let's return to that example I mentioned at the very beginning. We are going to observe this mixing process in a tangible context by looking at the universal phrase, "let's go home." In Standard English, an Indo-European language, we simply say, "let's go home." Now, if we look at Nicaraguan Creole English, which emerged on the Mosquito Coast, the translation is "le go home." You can clearly hear the English superstrate supplying the vocabulary, but the phonetic delivery and syntactic structure have been fundamentally shaped by African qua substrate languages. It creates a uniquely nativized expression. Finally, Consider Sheng, an emerging contact language or potential Creole in Kenya. To express the sentiment of let's go, they say tushie. This represents an intricate blend of a Swahili base with English influences and highly localized pure innovation. It brilliantly proves that the superstrate-substrate dynamic produces entirely distinct linguistic realities depending on the geography. Section 5. The Global Creole Footprint. This geographical variance firmly shatters the persistent myth that these languages are isolated to just a few French or Caribbean islands. The sheer scale of this linguistic phenomenon is staggering. Linguists estimate that over 100 distinct Creole languages have arisen worldwide just since the year 1500. This massive linguistic expansion was propelled primarily by global maritime trade, European colonization, and widespread human migration. Just consider the incredible variety of superstrate languages. Yes, we certainly have French-based Creoles like Haitian and Louisiana Creole, but we also have Arabic-based Creoles like Nubi and Juba. We have English bases forming Jamaican Patois and Creole in Sierra Leone. There are Portuguese bases forming Cape Verdean, Malay bases like Betawi in Indonesia, and Spanish bases like Chavacano in the Philippines. This definitively proves that creolization is a universal human cognitive process, functioning across almost every major language family on the globe. Section 6. From Stigma to Standardization. Finally, we must examine how society perceives these languages, and how that perception is fundamentally shifting today. Because they originated among subjugated, colonized, or enslaved populations, these languages have carried a very heavy historical burden. For centuries, they were stigmatized by the ruling classes as degenerate dialects. This often resulted in what linguists call a stable diglossia. Diglossia occurs when two languages exist side by side in a community, but one is deemed the high variety, used in government and education, while the Creole is deemed the low variety, restricted purely to private or domestic life. We saw this exact struggle for legitimacy with Nicaraguan Creole English, which fought for decades against standardized Spanish just for basic educational recognition. However, we are currently seeing a massive modern paradigm shift. The academic and political decolonization movements of the late 20th century have dramatically improved community prestige for these languages. Today, they are celebrated and actively standardized. Haitian Creole is now an official language of Haiti, co-equal with French. In Nicaragua, the URACCAN University actively promotes Creole standardization and bilingual education. We are witnessing the overdue elevation of these languages from marginalized vernaculars to respected, institutionalized mediums of academic and civic life. Which brings us to our conclusion, and a question I want to leave you to ponder. Language is not a static artifact in a museum. It is a living, breathing, evolving organism. With unprecedented global migration, the internet, and rapid urbanization, diverse linguistic groups are coming into contact faster than at any point in human history. So, applying the scientific framework we've rigorously examined today, as global communication accelerates, what new Creole languages might be quietly nativizing in our communities right now? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious and keep analyzing the fascinating world around you.